History likes to pretend kingdoms fall because of fate, destiny, or something poetic like the march of time. But if you zoom in on the right moments, a lot of them fell because somebody in charge basically said, "What if we do the dumbest possible thing, at scale?" Imagine being born into a powerful kingdom. The banners are flying, the palaces are polished, the soldiers march in perfect lines. Everywhere you look, you see strength. The old people say things like, "We are eternal. Our empire will last 1,000 years. Nothing can truly threaten us." And then one day, a general misreads a map, a king ignores a warning, or someone decides that attacking in the middle of a desert or in the middle of winter is a perfectly reasonable idea. And suddenly your eternal kingdom has like 2.5 years left. Tonight, we're not talking about heroic last stands or noble sacrifices. We're talking about the most bizarre military blunders that almost erased entire kingdoms. The moments when overconfidence replaced planning. When ego replaced intelligence. When propaganda replaced reality. When the people at the top looked at a situation, squinted, and apparently saw something like, "This will definitely work. What could possibly go wrong?" So get comfortable. Because by the end of this story you might look at your own mistakes and think, "Okay, at least I didn't accidentally trigger the slow-motion collapse of a 1,000-year empire." Let's start with one of Rome's worst days. Picture the Roman Republic in the 3rd century BCE. They've dealt with Carthage before. They've fought wars, lost some battles, won others. But now they're facing a man who feels like he spawned in on hard mode, Hannibal Barca. Hannibal has already marched war elephants over the Alps. He's beaten Roman armies multiple times. Rome is embarrassed, humiliated, and very, very angry. So the Senate decides, enough. No more cautious little armies, no more losses. They gather a massive force, one of the largest Rome has ever put together. The idea is simple and very Roman. We're going to take this giant hammer of an army and smash Hannibal flat. They meet at a place called Cannae in 216 BCE. The Romans pack their legions into a dense, tight formation. Imagine tens of thousands of men shoulder to shoulder, like a giant human battering ram. They're thinking, "We're going to punch straight through the enemy line and just keep going. They'll crumble under our weight." Hannibal takes one look at this and, in military terms, basically says, "Perfect. Let's try something insane." He arranges his forces in a curve. A slightly weaker center in the front, stronger troops on the flanks. When the Romans charge, they slam into Hannibal's center. The center slowly gives way, deliberately falling back. The Romans push harder and harder, thinking, "We're winning, we're breaking them." What they don't realize is that they're being sucked into a trap. As the Roman mass pushes forward, Hannibal's flanks start to fold inwards. Then his cavalry swings around to the back. The Roman army suddenly finds itself completely surrounded, trapped in a tightening ring of spears and shields. It's chaos. Men are packed so tightly that some accounts say they could barely raise their arms to fight. Many are crushed just by the weight of the crowd. By the end of the day, tens of thousands of Romans are dead. An entire generation of military manpower is wiped out. Rome doesn't fall immediately, but for a moment, the Republic is standing at the edge of a cliff, staring down into the abyss. The blunder here is almost painfully simple. Rome decided subtlety was overrated. They thought, "We don't need clever tactics or flexibility. We have numbers. We are Rome." They assumed Hannibal would just break under their raw weight. Instead, they handed one of history's greatest tacticians the perfect setup to perform the deadliest bear hug of all time. Lesson number 1. Don't cram your entire future into one giant clump and walk straight into a genius trap. Especially if that genius is Hannibal and your backup plan is basically, "We hit them harder." Let's fast forward a bit, to a time when Rome is an empire rather than a young republic. They've conquered Gaul. They've reached the Rhine. And now they're looking across the river at Germania and thinking, forests, tribes, lots of yelling. We should definitely colonize that. Enter Publius Quinctilius Varus. Varus is a Roman governor. A man of rank, status, and not a ton of frontier genius. But he's got something he thinks is even better, a local ally. That ally is a Germanic noble named Arminius. Arminius speaks Latin. He's served in the Roman army. He knows Roman tactics. He also quietly hates Roman rule and has absolutely no intention of being their pet barbarian forever. One day Arminius comes to Varus like, "There's a small uprising over there in the forest. Nothing big. Let's just march in and settle it." Varus believes him. He marches with 3 legions, that's elite Roman soldiers plus support units, baggage, camp followers, deep into the Teutoburg Forest. It's raining. The path is narrow, muddy, choked with trees. The columns stretch out in a long, vulnerable line. In other words, this is the last place you want to fight if your whole thing is disciplined, open-field maneuvers. And then Arminius disappears. Because of course he does. Germanic warriors ambush the Romans from the trees, from high ground, from both sides. The Romans can't form proper lines. They can't maneuver. They're slipping in mud, trapped between trees, hammered relentlessly by hit-and-run attacks. The massacre goes on for days. When it's over, 3 entire Roman legions are gone. Their famous eagles, the sacred standards, are captured. Back in Rome, the Emperor Augustus supposedly walks around muttering, "Varus, give me back my legions." But they aren't coming back. The fallout is enormous. Rome doesn't just lose soldiers. It loses appetite. They never fully conquer Germania. The empire's frontier stabilizes roughly along the Rhine. A whole region that might have been Roman ends up on a very different path. The blunder? Varus trusted the wrong person, underestimated the terrain, and walked elite troops into a natural kill box. It's the strategic equivalent of saying, "Yeah, I'm sure this totally not suspicious local prince who knows my entire playbook will lead me along the safest route." Spoiler, he did not. Let's move on to another empire that specialized in long-term survival, the Byzantines. Think of Byzantium as Rome, DLC edition. Extra gold, extra theology, extra drama. For centuries they hold on to their core territory in Anatolia, what is now much of Turkey. And then in 1071 they run into a problem, the Seljuk Turks. The Byzantines, led by Emperor Romanos IV, decide to confront the Seljuks near a place called Manzikert. On paper, the Byzantines have all the right ingredients. Professional troops, heavy cavalry, a tradition of strategy manuals, the whole package. Inside the army, though, it's messy. You've got political rivalries. Commanders who hate the emperor. Some who would honestly rather see him fail so they can move up. So Romanos heads east anyway with an army that is half weapon, half snake pit. There are early mistakes, splitting forces, bad coordination. By the time the battle happens, the Byzantine position is fragile. During the fighting, things get confused. Orders are misunderstood. At a critical moment, some units on the Byzantine side simply leave, possibly on purpose. The army collapses. Romanos is captured. An emperor taken prisoner in battle is rarely a good sign. But the real disaster is what happens after. The defeat triggers civil wars. Local defense in Anatolia crumbles. Seljuk and other Turkic groups begin to take over huge swaths of land. Within a few decades, the Byzantines lose most of their Anatolian heartland. Their tax base, their recruiting grounds, their strategic depth, all badly damaged. They survive technically. But the empire is now permanently weakened, fractured, and vulnerable. The blunder here is a deadly cocktail. Political intrigue, overconfidence, and a complete underestimation of what happens if your own people decide they'd rather stab you in the back than repel the actual enemy. It's not just, "we lost a battle." It's, "we lost the battle that opened the front door to our long, slow decline." Let's go somewhere hotter now. The 12th century Middle East. The Crusader kingdom of Jerusalem is clinging onto its patch of land, surrounded by larger, stronger Muslim powers. Enter Saladin, Sultan of a united Egypt and Syria. He's patient, strategic, and very good at making bad enemies pick bad decisions. In 1187, tensions finally explode. The Crusader king Guy of Lusignan gathers his forces to face Saladin. At one point, Guy faces a choice. He can stay near a strong position with access to water. Or he can march his heavily armored army across dry terrain in summer to try and relieve a small, besieged town and confront Saladin head-on. Against the advice of some experienced barons, Guy decides to march. After all, they've brought the relic of the true cross. God is on their side. How bad can it be? Very. The answer is very. Saladin lures them deeper into a trap. He cuts them off from water sources. His troops burn dry grass and scrub, filling the air with smoke and heat. The Crusaders in heavy armor, under a merciless sun, grow exhausted, thirsty, and disorganized. They end up near a place called the Horns of Hattin, hills rising out of the landscape. By the time battle is fully joined, the Crusader army is a wreck. They can't move properly. Morale is collapsing. They're surrounded. The result is a disaster. The army is destroyed. Many leading nobles are captured. The true cross is lost, and the road to Jerusalem lies wide open. Within a few months, Jerusalem falls to Saladin. The Crusader states never recover their earlier strength. Hattin is the moment their future evaporates under the sun. The blunder? Marching an entire army covered in metal into a furnace with no water, while your enemy controls the fire, the wind, and the timeline. It's like deciding to fight a swimming contest by letting the other guy drain your pool first. Let's turn east again, this time to one of the greatest cities of the medieval world, Baghdad. For centuries, Baghdad is the jewel of the Abbasid Caliphate. A center of science, philosophy, poetry, medicine. A place where some of the brightest minds on earth live and work. And then the Mongols arrive. The Mongol Empire has been rolling across the map like a force of nature. When they show up and politely ask you to submit and pay tribute, history suggests it's worth thinking very carefully before you say no. Hulagu Khan, the Mongol leader in this story, makes demands of the Abbasid Caliph Al-Mustasim. The Caliph responds with a combination of arrogance and wishful thinking. He underestimates the threat. He doesn't fully mobilize his defenses. He apparently assumes that Baghdad's prestige, its cultural and religious importance, will somehow protect it. It does not. In 1258, the Mongols besiege Baghdad. The city's defenses quickly crumble. What follows is one of the most brutal sackings in history. Libraries are destroyed. Palaces looted. Scholars, workers, civilians slaughtered in horrifying numbers. The Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad effectively ceases to exist. A major center of the Islamic world is erased in a few days of destruction. The blunder is chillingly simple. Treating the Mongols like they're just another negotiating partner. Assuming that status, tradition, and the glory of the past will somehow cancel out real current danger. You cannot argue with a steppe army that has spent decades proving it takes insults very personally. Let's head west onto the sea. The year is 1588. Spain is rich, powerful, and very annoyed. England, under Elizabeth I, is Protestant, pirating Spanish ships, and supporting rebels in the Netherlands against Spanish rule. Philip II of Spain decides to fix multiple problems at once by assembling a massive fleet, the Spanish Armada. The plan: sail up through the English Channel, link up with an army under the Duke of Parma in the Netherlands, ferry that army across and invade England. Easy. On paper. They even call it, somewhat prematurely, the Invincible Fleet. Militarily, that's called tempting fate. The Armada is big, heavily armed, and impressive. But the plan is complicated and very dependent on timing, coordination, and good weather. Three things that history loves to ruin. English ships are smaller, faster, more maneuverable. They harass the Armada along the channel, striking from a distance instead of getting close and cozy. At one point, the English send fireships, old vessels loaded with flammable materials, drifting toward the anchored Armada at night. Panic erupts. The Spanish ships cut anchors, scatter, and break formation. The precise, tightly controlled crescent formation the Spanish want to maintain is now a floating mess. The Armada never properly links up with Parma's army. After failing to secure the channel, they have to retreat by sailing around the north of Scotland and down past Ireland. Storms hit. Ships are wrecked along wild coasts. Hundreds, maybe thousands of sailors and soldiers die. The invasion fails. Spain remains a major power, but its aura of unbeatable supremacy is cracked. English morale explodes upward. Over time, naval power tilts in a new direction. The blunder? Trying to execute a rigid, complex invasion plan in an environment where you don't control the weather, your ships are less agile, and your entire strategy depends on every part of the machine working perfectly in sync. Also, naming your fleet Invincible when the Atlantic Ocean very much exists. Now, we can't talk about grand, empire-wrecking mistakes without saying hello again to Napoleon. In 1812, Napoleon decides to invade Russia. Because apparently history's big red flags weren't bright enough yet. He takes the Grande Armée, hundreds of thousands of troops, and marches east. His plan is neat and Napoleonic. Force the Russians into a decisive battle, defeat them, seize a key city, sign a treaty, go home, write smug letters. The Russians have another idea. They trade space for time. They retreat, burn supplies behind them, avoid giving Napoleon the perfect battle he wants. He marches deeper and deeper into an enormous country. Eventually he reaches Moscow, which is largely abandoned and on fire. There is no triumphant surrender. No neat peace treaty. Just a smoldering city and an army very far from home. Then comes the cold. The retreat from Russia becomes a nightmare. Starvation, frostbite, disease, constant harassment by Russian forces. The Grande Armée is destroyed more by hunger and winter than by any one battle. Napoleon doesn't lose his throne immediately, but it's the beginning of the end. His enemies sense weakness. Coalitions form. The emperor who seemed unstoppable suddenly looks very, very stoppable. The blunder. Treating a continent-sized country like just another campaign on the calendar. Assuming that logistics, distance, and climate are side quests. Spoiler, they are not side quests. They are the main boss. And finally, let's talk about a mistake so big it helped start a global war and erase an empire from existence. In 1914, Austria-Hungary is a fragile multi-ethnic empire. Inside its borders are Germans, Hungarians, Slavs, and many other groups, all with their own languages, loyalties, and frustrations. Then the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, is assassinated in Sarajevo by a Bosnian Serb nationalist. The leadership in Vienna is furious. They see Serbia, a small but proud Slavic kingdom, as the source of the threat. So they decide to make an example out of Serbia. They craft an ultimatum so harsh that accepting it fully would basically turn Serbia into a puppet. They believe they can crush Serbia quickly and restore their prestige. They're worried that if they don't, their Slavic subjects will see them as weak. They also think, Germany has our back. Russia might protest, but surely this won't spiral too far. You already know how this goes. Russia mobilizes to protect Serbia. Germany mobilizes to protect Austria-Hungary. France moves in because it's tied to Russia. Germany invades Belgium to get to France. Britain enters to defend Belgium. And suddenly Austria-Hungary discovers it has helped start World War I. For the empire, the war is disastrous. It strains their already fragile internal balance. Nationalist movements grow stronger. They suffer military defeats, economic crisis, internal collapse. By 1918, Austria-Hungary doesn't just lose the war. It dissolves. New countries appear where it once ruled. The empire is erased from the map. They began by trying to punish one small neighbor to look strong. They ended by ceasing to exist. It doesn't get much more bizarre military blunder that almost erased an entire kingdom than that. So, what ties all these stories together? Rome at Cannae, crowding its army into a perfect trap. Varus walking 3 legions into a forest ambush he should have seen coming. Byzantium stumbling into Manzikert and bleeding out its heartland. The Crusaders baking themselves alive at Hattin. The Abbasid Caliph underestimating the Mongols and losing Baghdad. Spain sending an invincible fleet to get shredded by weather and wits. Napoleon marching proudly into Russia's endless winter. Austria-Hungary lighting the fuse that blows up its own existence. Different places, different centuries, different religions, different weapons. Same pattern. Overconfidence. Bad information. Ignoring warnings. Underestimating the enemy, and underestimating nature. And above all, a refusal to imagine failure until it's too late to do anything else. From the outside, these blunders look absurd. From the inside, at the time, they often felt logical. Necessary. Even inevitable. That's the really scary part. We like to think that people in the past were either brilliant geniuses or total idiots. In reality, most of them were just people. People under pressure, making decisions with incomplete information, their egos and fears whispering in their ears. Sometimes they got it right. Sometimes they got it catastrophically wrong. And when you're in charge of an empire, catastrophically wrong doesn't just ruin your week. It ruins centuries. So the next time you lie awake at night replaying something embarrassing you said, or a decision you regret, remember this. You did not march 50,000 men into a desert with no water. You did not shrug off a Mongol ultimatum. You did not start a world war by misjudging one ultimatum and overestimating your own importance. Your mistakes are human. Theirs were human too, just amplified by power. If there's a lesson hiding inside all this chaos, maybe it's this. Check the map. Listen to the boring advisor who keeps talking about logistics. Respect the weather. Be suspicious of any plan that sounds invincible. And if you ever find yourself running an empire, try not to be the person history remembers for the sentence. Everything was fine until they decided to do that.